Hi guys, today I'm going to showcase my build for Mishra Tamer of Mak Fawa, or the Dragon Engine in the language of the Falaji. This is the second deck I've built centered around this character, and most likely won't be the last I'm going to do. You see, I opened his original card back in 2006, and was amazed by the peculiar ability, the art and the flavor text, and have been quite fond of him ever since. Anyway, there is no time like the present, so let's focus on the current deck. Since Mishra Tamer of Mak Fawa grants all artifacts in our graveyard on Earth, the deck I built is centered around the yard with focus on artifact creatures, whose value is easier to preserve in our colors compared to non-creature ones. While we're on the topic, the main way to keep the value of unearthing a creature with Mishra is to exile it. This is due to some specific rule interactions. Rulings time. First off, let's look at Unearth. Rule 702.84a. Unearth is an activated ability that functions while the card with Unearth is in the graveyard. Unearth cost means pay a cost, return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. If it would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. Activate only as a sorcery. The keyword here is instead. This means that this part of Unearth is a replacement effect. Now we all know all blink cards exile the permanent their target and return it either immediately or with some delay. When such effect is used on an unearthed permanent, the interaction goes like this. The blink effect, say displays, targets an unearthed creature and attempts to make it leave the battlefield by exiling it. This in turn activates Unearth's replacement effect, which replaces the effect that is causing the permanent to leave the battlefield with exile, which in this case means that it replaces the word exile in this place with exile. Since the text of this place is basically unchanged, it resolves as normal and returns the creature as a new object with no memory of ever being unearthed, which also means that it won't be exiled at the end of the turn or if it would leave play for any other reason. All that being said, Mishra lacks white or blue, and those are the main blink colors. This means that we lose access to a single-use effect such as Displace, Ghostly Flicker or Eerie Interlude, and permanent effects such as Tassa the Deep Dwelling, Teleportation Circle, Far Traveler, and the only thing we have left is colorless artifacts such as Conjurer's Closet and Sundial the Infinite. This conundrum calls for some thinking outside the box, but more on that later in the video. Before we jump into the deck categories, I'd like to mention that for this video, I decided to experiment with some custom categories to better explain the function of the cards. We start off with our artifact creatures. In this category there are 23 creatures, 4 vehicles that Mishra can crew and turn into creatures, and Spine of Ishtar, which is not a creature but is nonetheless solid removal in an artifact based deck, and I didn't want to make a separate category for just one card. Since we are talking about removal, the creatures that also fulfill this role are Duplicant, Noxious Gearhulk, Locust Heavy Destroyer, Necron Deathmark, and Mage Ring Responder for creature removal. I'll make a small detour to explain the last card. It looks like a meme pick, but it isn't. It has a solid body and deals 0 damage or attack to any creature that defending player controls, and that amount is usually plenty enough to take it out. The part where it doesn't attack is irrelevant in our strategy to unearth it, meaning either we will blink it and save it, or we will simply go away. For other problematic permanents, I put Chaos Defiler, who is a bit RNG but also quite fun, Steel Hellkite and Meteor Golem. Next are some multi-purpose creatures such as Flayed One that also mills us, Cryptek that can recur an artifact creature that is about to die, and Combustible Gearhulk that has a big body and either draws or mills us, and if we're lucky can even knock out an overly brave opponent. Emotech the Stormlord and Anrakir the Traveler provide solid value on their own. Speaking of value, there are some cards that have both amazing bodies and huge benefits when they go to the yard or attack. Those include Scuttling Doom Engine that dishes 6 damage to an opponent or enemy planeswalker, Reaver Titan that has protection for most common removals and deals 5 damage to each opponent on attack, and Mere Battlesphere that makes Mere tokens that can tap to deal extra damage. The value of others is measured in tokens. Necron Monolith that mills us and makes Necron tokens on attack, Wormcore Agent, Trirexian Triniform, Triplicate Titan, and Ancient Stone Idol make creatures of different sizes when they die. Technomancer can resurrect artifact creatures up to 6 mana, and also mills us for 3 cards. 2 more vehicles join the fray with Golden Argosy, whose main purpose is to get crewed by our unearthed creatures in order to blink them, and Conquest Galleon, which blinks itself after combat and transforms into Conquest Foothold, a land that can loot, draw, or recur cards from the yard. Last are the huge beaters, Darksteel Colossus, Metal Lure Colossus, and of course, Blacksteel Colossus. #reprint. The next category is Graveyard Fillers and includes mainly self-mill and discard effects. Those include the already mentioned Flayed One, Technomancer, Necron Deathmark, Combustible Gearhulk, and Necron Monolith. All the self-mill pieces are Perpetual Timepiece, Out of the Tomb, Cemetery Tampering, who provide additional upside on their own. Buried Alive and Goblin Engineer easily tutor for our biggest threats and put them exactly where we want them. For discard I chose to put Faceless Looting, Big Score, Unexpected Windfall, the Retty Scrap Savant who can also sacrifice an artifact to return another one from the yard, Jaxis the Troublemaker, who can create tokens over huge beaters by paying 1 red and basically rummaging, thus keeping the yard ever so full, Garrowitch Sanitarium, and if you thought I wouldn't include the Celestus after I put it in literally every single deck I've showcased so far, well, you thought wrong. I can't lie, the card is on its way to becoming my favorite mana rock, and the looting ability is always nice, but especially relevant in the deck like this. So far we saw what we're going to unearth and how we're going to fill the graveyard. As I already mentioned, our options for blinking are rather limited by Rakdos Scholars of Mishra, and this calls for some thinking outside the box. I managed to find 2 other cards that straight out blink, and those are Swords of Harhan Home and Golden Argosy, with a small caveat that they depend on attacking or dealing damage with them. Looking at my cold storage of cards, I also found Endless Sands and Hellvault, all of which can exile a creature that we own and is about to die or be exiled due to a nerf, and then bring it back at a later time. Synod Sanctum, on the other hand, is the only card that can preserve the value of a non-creature artifact. Lastly, Voyager Staff is a neat little bling artifact that we can use a second time thanks to Mishra. Combined with Sundial the Infinite, which exiles the unearth trigger that occurs at the end of the turn, and Conjurer's Closet, this makes for a total of 9 cards that can preserve the value of our unearthed creatures. Next category is Value, for the lack of a better name, and it includes cards that either provide mana cheat, recur artifacts from the graveyard, or overall synergistic with what we're trying to do. Those include Tomb Fortress, Out of the Tombs, the Retty Swap Savant, Unrakir the Traveler, and Technomancer, who recur artifacts from the graveyard, Whip of Horribles, which acts as a slightly more expensive backup version of Mishra, Goblin Welder, Scrap Welder, and Goblin Engineer recycle artifacts from the battlefield to recur another artifact from the graveyard. Cryptic is a nice card that can save an artifact creature that is about to die or be sacrificed, and Imhotep the Stormlord churns our Necron tokens whenever an artifact leaves our graveyard, which is exactly what we are trying to do. Coming up next are Conquest Galleon, Jaxis the Troublemaker, and Mystic Forge that can cast the better portion of our deck straight from the top of the library. Lastly is Achilles Directive, a card that is essentially Genesis Wave for artifacts that also has Improvise. I decided to include it because it is both catch-up mechanism in the late game, and even if you cast it early, say for X equals 5, and only put a mana rock, and can't put say Phyrexian Triniform with it, all our revealed cards will go to the graveyard and can be unearthed at a later time. Up next are some utility artifacts, Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots which provide protection for Mishra, and Darksteel Forge which provides blanket protection for our artifacts. On the other hand, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Rakdos Signet, Cold Steel Heart, Star Compass, the Celestus and Skyclave Relic provide us with extra mana. For mass targeted spells I chose 2 Bold Wipes in Necromantic Selection and Volcanic Vision, and 2 recursion pieces, Scrap Mastery and Living Death, which go amazingly well with our full graveyard. The mana base features some of the mentioned lands such as Tomb Fortress, Garrowitch Sanitarium and Endless Sands, along with some artifact lands, Drossforge Bridge, Vault of Whispers and Great Furnace. The rest of the mana base is focused on making sure we have mana to cast stuff with Mishra freely. It includes Command Tower, Blood Crypt, Dragon Skull Summit, Foreboding Ruins, Halting Reach, Smoldering Marsh, Sulphurous Springs, Spire of Industry, the 2 filter lands Graven Cairns and Shadowblood Ridge, and lastly 7 mountains and 12 swamps for a total 35 land cards. I decided to exclude Treasure Vault because there is no need for it in my opinion, and Urza Saga, which wouldn't be the all-star it is in most artifact decks, and frankly would be a total flavor fail. Well, this is my take on Mishra Tamer of Mak Fawa. I must admit it was quite fun to build around this commander, and I can't wait to get my hands on him. Anyway, I hope that you like my deck tech, and that will be useful for you when you build your own decks. Cheers!